So relevant to this standard, let's ask some interesting questions. How can auditor perform his or her duties with due professional care? What is infallibility? How systematic and disciplined approach may help in applying due professional care? How to ensure due professional care at the engagement level? And how to demonstrate conformance with standard 1220 on application of due professional care. So during the review of these standards, let's try to get responses to all these questions. So standard 1220 due professional care. Let's see what is the requirement. It requires that internal auditors must apply the care and skill which is expected of a reasonably competent and prudent internal auditor. Also, the due professional care does not imply the infallibility. So in the next segments, we will try to double click this definition. Let's understand it with more clarity so we can apply it in the day-to-day internal audit activities. So to understand the definition of due professional care, we need to understand what is infallibility. In the literal meaning of infallibility is perfection or flawlessness. So this means that when we say that the due professional care does not employ infallibility, it means that it's not expected from an internal auditor to have perfection in their opinion. So it means that the internal auditors are not expected to give an absolute assurance. We know that we need to give a reasonable assurance that the non-compliance or irregularities do not exist. So this is this absolute assurance is excluded actually from the work of the internal auditor. So due professional care does not mean that. We need to understand that. So now let's have a look at the assurance standard on the due professional care. The standard 1220A1 requires that internal auditors must exercise due professional care by considering the extent of work needed to achieve the engagement's objectives, relative complexity, materiality, or significance of matters to which assurance procedures are applied. Number 3, adequacy and effectiveness of governance, risk management, and control processes, and probability of significant errors, fraud, or non-compliance. And number 5, cost of assurance in relation to potential benefits. And the second assurance standard, which is 1220A2, it requires that in exercising due professional care, the internal auditors must consider the use of technology-based audit and other data analysis techniques. And A3, which requires that internal auditors must be alert to the significant risks that might affect the objectives, operations, resources, and these things actually. And however, the assurance procedures alone, even when performed with due professional care, they do not guarantee that all the significant risks will be identified. And that is why at the end we are seeing that the auditor is providing a reasonable assurance rather than an absolute assurance. The consulting standard C1 on the series of 1220, it requires that the internal auditors must exercise due professional care during a consulting engagement by considering number one, the need and expectations of clients, including the nature, timing, and communication of engagement results. Number two, relative complexity and extent of work needed to achieve the engagement's objective, that has direct impact on the efficiency of the audit and the skill set which you are bringing in for a consulting exercise. And number three is the cost of consulting engagement in relation to the potential benefits. So let's get the answer to our question, like how an internal auditor can can perform their duties with due professional care. So now the answer is in at the two levels. One is at the internal audit level and one is at the engagement level. The auditor should get the relevant experience, education, certifications and trainings. He should become or she should become familiar with the core competencies. You may refer to the IIA's Global Internal Audit Competency Framework. And the internal auditor should understand and apply the mandatory guidance of the International Professional Practices Framework. At the engagement level, the applying due professional care involves comprehending the objective and scope of the engagement. So, need to understand that, as well as the competencies that will be required to execute the audit work. And here we are talking about the collective responsibilities if a team is working. Also need to understand any policies and procedures specific to the internal audit activity and the organization. As part of implementation guide, the IIA provides us the considerations for implementation, and that explains us that how the internal auditors they have to conform with the due professional care. So they can actually, it can requires it requires internal auditors. The due professional care requires from internal auditors conformance with number one, the IIA's Code of Ethics, which is having the traits and the qualities internal auditor should carry, and may entail conformance with the organization's code of conduct and any additional code of conducts relevant to the other professional designations attained. The internal audit activity, it may have a formal process that requires the internal auditors to sign an annual declaration related to IIA's Code of Ethics or the organizational code of conduct, because I remember we were actually signing two codes, one for the internal auditor on annual basis and one for the organization as an acceptance to the requirement, and both are mostly having similar, but internal audit is more specific to what is IIA requires, while the organizational code of conduct was having a different view of code of conduct from the organizational perspective. So let's understand how systematic and disciplined approach may help in applying due professional care. So systematic and disciplined approach helps in planning, executing and documenting the internal audit work. This can be achieved by applying the International Professional Practices Framework, the policies and procedures of the internal audit activity. So now by following this systematic and disciplined approach, automatically the internal auditors essentially apply the due professional care. So what constitutes the due professional care? partially depends on the complexity of the engagement. As we seen that all the assurance standards A1, A2, A3 and consulting standard, they describe the elements where the internal auditor needs to consider when it's exercising the due professional care. For example, internal auditor needs to must consider the possibility of the significant errors, fraud, and the non-compliance, and are expected to conduct some of the verifications or examinations relevant to that, and to the same extent as would a reasonably competent and prudent internal auditor would do in the similar circumstances. So, how to ensure that the due professional care is performed properly at the engagement level? So, to ensure due professional care at the engagement level, we need to see the standard 2340, which is relevant to this. So which requires the engagement supervisions should be properly done. I mean, and it generally involves the supervisory review of the working papers. You have to see the results, proper review of the results, conclusions, which are to be reported, which are backed by the proper documentation, review and evidence, supervisors' feedback to the internal auditors who conducted the engagement, often through the post-engagement meetings, the input about the internal auditors, due professional care. It is very important to document this directly because that will be very helpful, and also that can be get through the post-engagement surveys of the audit clients. So, in managing the internal audit activity, which is part of the performance standards, we will be reviewing those, and implementing a quality assurance and improvement program. I have a video on that, the standard series of 1300. The chief audit executive assumes the overall responsibility for ensuring that the due professional care is applied. The chief audit executive typically develops the tools such as the self-assessment, metrics such as KPIs, or a process to assess the performance of individual auditors or the internal audit activity as a whole. In addition to the client surveys, which are helpful tools to evaluate individual internal auditors, could include the peer and supervisory reviews. The internal audit activity as a whole may be evaluated through the internal assessments, external assessments, which are covered by section 1310 and 1312. Again, I have a detailed video on quality assurance and improvement program. You can refer back to that. And also client surveys or similar methods of feedback. So, let us talk about the demonstration of conformance. So, how demonstration of the conformance can be made through for the standard 1220 on the application of due professional care. The internal auditors demonstrate conformance through proper application of IPPF's mandatory guidance, which would be reflected in their engagement plans, work programs, and work papers. Performance reviews of internal auditors may refer their application of due professional care. Appropriate supervisory reviews of engagements is likely to be documented in working papers. Due professional care may also be evidenced when the engagement supervisor conducts post-engagement staff meetings and solicit feedback from the audit clients through surveys or other tools. Additionally, evidence may include an annual declaration related to the IIA's Code of Ethics and the organizational code of conduct. Finally, the internal and external assessments performed as part of the internal audit activities, quality assurance and improvement program also may indicate that the due professional care has been maintained. So, concluding and summing up our discussion on due professional care, let's see what are the answers to our questions we have asked when we started our video on this. So, how auditors perform their duties with due professional care? So, for internal auditors and also at the engagement level, we understood that that the internal auditor get relevant experience, education, certification, understand the core competencies as per IIA's global internal audit competency framework. They apply IPPF. At the engagement level, we understood that the objectives and scope of the engagement should be understood, and the competencies required to execute work and policies and procedures also should be understood by the internal auditor. What is infallibility? Means perfection, flawlessness. We understand the literal meaning of that. That means that internal auditors are not expected to give an absolute assurance, and that non-compliance or irregularities, that the non-compliance or irregularities do not exist. As the standard required, the due professional care does not employ infallibility. So, it's not the perfection is not expected from the internal auditors. How the systematic and disciplined approach may help in applying due professional care? Again, by planning, executing and documenting the internal audit work, and by applying the IPPF and the policies and procedures of internal audit activity. And essentially, when this the systematic and disciplined approach is adopted, the internal auditors essentially they are applying the due professional care. And then how to ensure that due professional care at the engagement level exists? We need to ensure that at the engagement level by understanding the standard 2340, which is about the engagement supervision. We know that this involves supervisory review of the engagement work papers, results, conclusions, supervisors' feedback to internal auditors who conducted the engagement, and this can be get through the post-engagement meetings. Also, input about internal auditors due professional care may be solicited through the post-engagement surveys of audit clients. The next question and the last question we asked is how to demonstrate conformance with the standard 1220 on the application of due professional care. So, this is through the proper application of IPPF's mandatory guidance, which is reflected through. Now, we need to have the documentation of this all, the engagement plans, work programs, work papers, performance reviews of internal auditors, appropriate supervisory reviews of engagements that should be duly documented. I remember we were having a techno-linguistic committee which was reviewing these reports, and they were giving and documenting the notes and their feedback. Also, feedback from the audit client through surveys and the annual declaration of IIA Code of Ethics, which everybody is signing, and as well as the organization's code of conduct, and the internal and external assessments which are performed under as per the internal audit activities, quality assurance and improvement program, that also indicate that the due professional care has been maintained. So, thank you so much for watching my videos. Hopefully, you have learned about due professional care and have clarity over how you will apply this in your day-to-day activities on whenever you are conducting an engagement, whether it is assurance related or consulting related, and how the due professional care will be applied practically. Thank you so much. Like my videos, please subscribe and share them to the other people so they can also learn about the IIA standards, and hopefully I'll be sharing more videos on this and on other topics as well. Thanks a lot.